Hi, thanks for listening to At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. I'm Gary Pounder. Today on the program, we have a special guest. He's a retired Command Master Chief Petty Officer from the U.S. Navy, now serving as the military liaison for Virginia Senator Mark Warner. His name is Gene Garland, and he has a very compelling story about making the most of your military career, followed by a very successful transition to the civilian sector. Our conversation with Gene will begin in just a moment. But first, a message for those of you leaving the service in the months ahead. How would you like to earn an in-demand skill before you enter the civilian job market and at virtually no cost to you? I'm referring to the Skill Bridge Welding Training Program here at Thomas Nelson. As the name indicates, it's part of the military Skill Bridge program, which allows transitioning service members to spend up to 16 weeks in an education, OJT, or credentialing program during their last 6 months on active duty. It's aimed at helping you acquire new skills and enhancing your employability in today's job market. Well, best of all, the welding program at TNCC is only 5 weeks in length, and you can choose from morning, afternoon, or evening sessions. You'll earn a certification in shielded metal arc welding, which can help you land a job as a welding trainee. And if you do well in the program, and most of our military students do very well, you'll be encouraged to apply for a position with Newport News Shipbuilding, offering great pay and benefits from day one. And best of all, the cost for the program is paid by Virginia CareerWorks and the Thomas Nelson Educational Foundation. Learn more by calling the military team here at TNCC. Our number is 757-825-2938. Or you can email me, pounderg@tncc.edu. That's pounderg@tncc.edu. Get ready for your new civilian career at Thomas Nelson, becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College. Our guest today on At Ease is Gene Garland. He is currently the military liaison for Virginia Senator Mark Warner, working out of the Senator's Norfolk office. He's a very important connection between the senator and our military community here in Hampton Roads. But before he got into the public service and political realm, he spent 30-plus years in the U.S. Navy, rising to the rank of Command Master Chief Petty Officer. He had a number of assignments, especially at the senior enlisted level, that made a big difference for the ships and the commands he served for and for the U.S. Navy. So he's a man of great accomplishment, and we're just, again, delighted to have him here on the podcast. Gene, once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on At Ease.
Well, Gary, thank you very much for this. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. Again, thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let's get into it. We'll talk about your Navy background, first of all. Again, 30 years on active duty. My hat's off to you. I did 20 and said that was enough, and I think the Air Force said, yeah, that's enough for you, too. Going into your military background, what prompted you as a young man to join the U.S. Navy?
Well, it was unique. I from an urban background, both my mother and father worked really hard, and my mother was just gung ho. Hey, you're going to join. You're going to go to college. You're going to go to college. So after I graduated in 1990, I went to college for about a month. Just found that it wasn't my cup of tea, and decided, I could make some real money. So I ended up working literally 3 jobs at one time. So I was working a place called Hot Now, and the owner of Hot Now owned a chicken plant where he needed someone to move chicken boxes. So I worked for him, and he also owned properties where he needed someone to cut the grass. So I would cut the grass. So literally at one point I was working 3 jobs at one time. And I remember thinking, man, there's got to be more than life to this. So 1991 rolled around, and I began to have a series of dreams just about the military, every branch. And then one day I was like, hey, you know what? Let me go try this. So I used to stalk out the Air Force all the time, right? And literally in between job 2 and 3, I would take that time and I would sit in my car and I would see the Army recruiter, I see the Navy recruiter, I see the Marine Corps recruiter. Never saw the Air Force recruiter. Like, man, where's this guy at? And then one day I was in between jobs. I'm thinking, man, I got 2 hours. I'm just going to sit out here till I see this guy. And I finally see him walk in, race into the building. So I quickly locked my car doors, ran in after him, right? And I go in and the door is half open. The lights are off with the exception of this little desk lamp. And he's on the phone and he's kind of crouched down like he's singing lullabies to somebody. I don't know. It was just awkward to me. And so I pushed my way into the door. He saw me. He kept turning away from me. And I kept standing in front of him, but he kept turning away. So he finally put down his phone and said, "What do you need?" I said, "Well, I want to join the Air Force." So he mumbled something and turned his back to me and kept talking on the phone. I said, "Excuse me, I didn't hear you." So this guy jumps up and says, "I said put your name on the board." So with hands up, I back off really slowly. Hey, that's okay. So as I'm backing out the door, I bump into this Navy chief that's got a box of Dunkin' Donuts. And I said, "Man,
what great timing."
Great time." I said, "I'm starving. I know I got to be to work here in the next hour and a half. Can I get a donut and not join the Navy?" So I walk over to the door, and I'm watching this guy with gloves neatly put down the donuts. He goes, "Hey, would you like a donut?" My response was, "I don't want to join the Navy. I didn't ask you that. I asked you if you wanted a donut." So I said, "Sure." So I came in, had a donut. The next 30 minutes, we talked about sports. We talked about me working out. We talked about all kinds of stuff. And then he said, "You know, I heard the Air Force guy yell at you." He said, "Do you know why he did that?" I said, "No." He said, "One, that was rude of him. And number two, they get their quota every month, so they'll just treat you like a number." He said, "Have I treated you like a number?" "No, you haven't." "Hey, would you like another donut?" "Sure." So I got the second donut, and I said, "Okay, tell me about the Navy." So he starts talking. He said, "You look pretty fit." At the time, was still working out, was running 2 or 3 miles, somewhere in between my days off. I was just running because I used to wrestle by high school. Not a great wrestler, but I used to wrestle. And talked and talked. He said, "Hey, wait, come back and see a recruiter." April 12th, I went off to MEPS, first physical. April 23rd, I flew off to San Diego. On April 24th, 1991, I flew off to boot camp in those days in San Diego, California to joining my Navy, beginning my Navy experience.
Now, let me ask you a question, Gene. You initially told the Navy recruiter, "Hey, thanks for the donut. I don't want to join the Navy."
I did.
At what point in his conversation with you did you start becoming more receptive to the idea of going in the U.S. Navy?
Well, one, because he represented the Navy, the hospitality. Number two, the fact that I like Dunkin' Donuts. I just do. Number three, he talked to me as a person, and he seemed to take an interest in me as a person. And I think that kind of wooed me to continue that conversation.
Now, at what point, in this process, was it that first conversation? Was it subsequent conversations? When was it you finally said, "Yes, I'm going to make a commitment. I'm going to go ahead and enlist in the U.S. Navy"?
So what he did was, he said, "Hey, I want to set you up to be a recruiter." I went home and told my parents, and my mother prayed, "God, let this be honest and let this God be your will." So when we did meet the recruiter, he was brutally honest about the Navy. And he was so honest, the other recruiter had to elbow him and say, "Hey, you want him to join, right?" But it was an answer to my mother's prayer. And after seeing that, I said, "Yep, I'm in. I want to do this." And I think that honesty right away, right? First it was the care. First it was to talk to me as a person. And then it was the honesty that attracted me to joining.
We've all been through that experience, those of us who served and those of us who enlisted, regardless of where you wound up in your career and everything. And, the honest approach, the honest broker of information, that is what really works best. You can paint these rosy pictures about, travel and benefits and stuff like that. But to be fair and to know what you're getting into, the recruit needs to understand exactly what is entailed in the complete package. And recruiters who take the approach that gentleman used with you, I think, is much more successful over the long haul. So you're enlisting in the Navy. You're going off to boot camp in San Diego. Now it's at Great Lakes in Illinois. What was your first job in the Navy?
So when I first came to the Navy, I was what's called a radioman. That's now it's in IT. And so on board ship, you're responsible for all the communications equipment, right?
Was that the job you wanted coming in?
That was, but that's not what I thought. So when I sat down, so once you go to the maps, if you take your ADFAB, they sit down and said you qualify for the following jobs. And ironically, I had a friend pop into Bojangles one day who had went in the Navy and said, "Whatever you do, don't come in undesignated. Find a job." And so I kind of thought when they said radioman, I'd be doing this, broadcasting, public affairs. I said, "Yes, I'm in." Not what I experienced, but that's okay. It was a good start.
Sure. And talk about your early assignments in the Navy. Were they shore-based? Were they on ship?
Okay.
And some of the lessons you learned as a young sailor in the Navy.
So my first assignment was USS Theodore Roosevelt. This is 1991 in Norfolk, Virginia. At the time, the ship was in the shipyards in Portsmouth, Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, Virginia. And one of the early lessons I learned is people judge me on what I look like. They judge me on the color of my skin. So I came in, checked in enthusiasm, and it was an African-American chief that pulled me aside and said, they're already saying you and the 3 other African-Americans are going to get put out the Navy. They're already saying that they expect trouble out of y'all. But here's what you need to do. He pulled me, his name was RMC Amos Hardy. He said, you need to work hard. You need to advance as fast as you can. And you need to work harder, work longer, and show them that their racism is wrong. And so that's what I did. By the grace of God, I went in and did all my military retirement requirements. Again, I was E1 up to E8, senior chief. I did as an E1. I was always trying to qualify stuff. I was always turning stuff in. I was making sure I was early to meetings. I was making sure I was blessed to get food service attendant of the month, which is at that time was a very prestigious award because you do this thing called mess cranking, right? And these same folks that were those folks that paint me based on what I look like, you know, they had egg on their face because I didn't fit that stereotype.
Now, let me ask you, were you surprised by this kind of reception? We're talking about now 1991, 1992. The military has been integrated at that point for, let's see, you know, well over 40 years.
Right.
Was that surprising to you? I mean, obviously, we've got to be honest and admit that racism, unfortunately, still exists in America and exists to some degree in the U.S. military. But being told, I mean, here you are, a brand new sailor on the ship, and you're being told that certain people, and I'm assuming we're talking about senior and enlisted and people on the officer side, are already pegging you and other African-American sailors who've just joined the crew for being potentially kicked out of the Navy.
Well, it's not everybody, number one, because there's some good people of all kinds, right? But you have that core few that's still stuck in the 1950s. But by the grace of God, was I surprised? Not really. I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. They still fly the Confederate flag certain places. And, you know, that's the group that lost the Civil War. So, you know, last time.
And the big base there is named after a Confederate general.
It is. And last time I checked, you don't reward losers. That's just the way it is. But by the grace of God, first and foremost, I was able to get those awards and then made E4 the first time up, which stunned them. So in the Navy, a perfect score for an advancement exam is 80. I caught a 70, which blew them away. And that's only, again, by God's grace.
Now, after that, after you're a member of the crew on the Theodore Roosevelt, talk about the next steps in your Navy career and the lessons that you really took away from that first assignment, going into a hostile environment, doing very well, and how did that prepare you for the remainder of your Navy career?
So what it did was it let me know that faith in God always pays off, number one. Number two, after Theodore Roosevelt, I went to Sublet Norfolk as a shore duty, and I walked in and I was one of 3 surface guys in the submarine environment. So submariners are some of the most smartest people in the Navy, but sometimes some of the most cocky. And I walked in and they wear what's called dolphins. So dolphins is a warfare device. I didn't have one. So every day I would see them and I would get reminded, you need to get a warfare device. So met some good people there. Was blessed by, again, the grace of God to score an 80. 80 is a perfect score when I made E5. Nothing but God's goodness and grace. Made E5. Met my beautiful wife, got married, ended up becoming a father, and then transferred from there, and I went to USS Wasp.
Amphibious ship.
Amphibious ship. So I loved it. So I checked on board the Wasp, and from day one I said, I got to get my surface warfare pen. So checking on board, I literally checked on board and said, I want a book to get surface warfare. So I hit the deck running. This is also the command where I get Junior Sailor of the Year. Again, nothing but God's grace. So I was E5 at the time, and I was kind of like the wild card in professional sports. So they already had nominated 6 people for Junior Sailor of the Year. They needed someone. I was the backup guy. Hey, Gene, need you to apply for this. Sure. Went in, got boarded, and only by God's grace ended up winning the whole board, getting Junior Sailor of the Year. I get 10-day stay at the hotel. I get 10 movie tickets. I get vouchers for restaurants. I get an interview. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time. I was able to be a blessing definitely to my wife, my family. And WASP was a great tour. I also made E6 off the WASP. And then I converted from what's called RM, which became IT, to Navy counselor. And Navy counselor was my real calling because I like helping people.
Yeah, talk about the Navy counselor career field. I actually had a lot of interaction with the Navy counselor community when I worked for another school after I retired from active duty. Navy counselor, it's a great concept in the Navy. These folks, and I'll let you talk about the duties and everything, but they really provide a valuable service, whether it's on board ship, in a shore-based command, in helping sailors basically make the best of their Navy career and decide, how they can keep moving ahead in the Navy, or, that the service is not the right thing for them, help them kind of begin to make that transition out of the Navy and toward a civilian career.
Well, the first thing I do, one, I want to thank God because he opened that door. Number two, I have a beautiful wife named Kim Garland. She's gorgeous. She looks good. She smells good, is good. And she was supportive when I said, hey, I wanted to change from IT to NC. And so when I became an NC, there was a vacancy on board USS Wasp. They said, you can stay here, but you have to extend, which I did. And there, I help people change ratings. That's jobs. I help people retire. I help put people on retirement paths. We did all the indoctrination. So think about this. We were basically the human resources thing that talked about retention, talked about retirement, and we did programs that helped sailors to re-enlist if they desired. And we also put a couple $1 million in re-enlistment bonus into the hands of multiple sailors on board USS Wasp.
Now, at this point, you've already made Petty Officer First Class, so you're an E6. How far along are you in your Navy career when you became a Navy counselor on board USS Wasp?
I think I was about at 8 years, somewhere between 8 to 10 years when I did it. And I did it because I really like helping people more than I like doing the equipment. RM had become IT, and I'm not the guy you want to have work on your computer. And so I found my first calling was people programs, so forth and so on. God really blessed in the NC field. We got the USS Watts was called the Retention Excellence Award, which means of the amphibious ships in Hampton Roads, we had what's called retention benchmarks, which set up the ship to be successful.
Excellent. Now, let me ask you something, too. You're about the 8-year point in your Navy career at this juncture. As a junior sailor, what did you see and experience in terms of leadership and experience that, A, helped you create your own leadership style, and B, maybe convinced you that as I keep rising through the ranks here in the U.S. Navy, there are some things that I want to do differently?
So some of the lessons I learned during this part of my career was that you get good leaders, you get bad leaders. And there's a biblical principle that goes, whatsoever man soweth, that shall they also reap. And I noticed every one of the bad leaders I had that would sow bad seeds, bad things will happen to them. I never forget, I had to go to, when I was in IT, I had to go to the bridge to help with some equipment. And there was this one lieutenant who just treated me awful. And the embarrassment of the bridge, then he kicked me off the bridge. And I remember feeling some type of way. So I went to my Bible, and God spoke through the word of God and said, hey, I'm going to give you double for your trouble, which ended up getting 2 promotions off WASP, 2 big recognitions, Junior Sailor of the Year and Sailor of the Day, and just set up for Chief Petty Officer. This same lieutenant ended up having the same thing happen to him by the commanding officer. So there was a situation on the bridge. Commanding officer was not happy as he was trying to qualify officer today, and he kicked him off the bridge, the same way I had get kicked off.
Yeah.
And I remember that lieutenant coming down, put his hand on his face, said, my career is done. I'm retired as lieutenant. And I remember hearing the story and thinking, man, you reap what you sow.
Yep.
So one of the lessons I learned is if you want to get promoted, you have to help others get promoted. If you want to do better, help others do better. Even you can have the power in your hands to stop a career or the power in your hands to help a career. Help someone else's career. And that was a huge lesson I learned then as I became an NC1 E6. My heart doing Navy counselor was to help people to get to retirement, help people get promoted, help people be better, help people be recognized. They even asked me to chair the Junior Sailor of the Year board that year, which was great. And we ended up picking a great sailor because, again, it's the same principles. Helping someone else get better.
Sure. Now, as you move along in the Navy, obviously you've picked up a lot of lessons, interacting with commanders, senior enlisted, ordinary sailors. Looking back, who do you think were your biggest mentors during your days in uniform, and what lessons did you take away from them? And conversely, who were, you don't have to name names, but who were some of the worst leaders you encountered, and how did those experiences influence you?
So as far as good mentors, first, Jesus Christ. His intervention, his guidance, he opened doors. He's number one. Number two, a guy named Fred Caldwell. So when I got to TR, Fred Caldwell was this believer who helped me to grow in my faith, grow into studying the Word of God, grow into believing, because God only moves by faith. A guy named Brian Skipworth. Brian Skipworth was the chief when I was an E5 on WASP, who said to me, man, you're going to make chief one of these days. And as soon as I made chief, I sent for Brian Skipworth. Joe Pucciarella taught me how to be a Navy counselor. He taught me to have care for sailors. Delta Henson was my command master chief, and a great example of what a SEAM should be. The best SEAM I had is a guy named Alan R. Walker III, who was a man of God, who was so wise. So the guy looked like Samuel Jackson, but he talked like James Brown. So you had to kind of listen to him real close, but his wisdom was so profound, it had a big effect on USS Stiller Roosevelt. Some bad leaders. When I was at TSC Hampton Roads, I had the worst CEO I ever worked for. So apparently she was relieved from running the ship aground. She just created a hostile, toxic environment. And then, of course, her career ended there at TSC Hampton Roads. There was a certain lieutenant who I remember said that my kind won't do well here. And of course, I'm thinking, does that mean people from North Carolina? Does that mean folks that like NC State? Take it however you would take it. His career ended on USS Wasp. Don Stoddard, great leader, great IT master chief. The guy was just full of enthusiasm, just another great person. My wife, I got to give my wife Kim Garland, very supportive in my career. I thank God for her. She's gotten better with age. She's more beautiful now than when I first met her.
She's going to love this podcast.
And bad leaders. When I went to Great Lakes, I had a CMC that was dealing with a lot of personal issues. So what he would do is he would transfer that to a lot of people. And again, he began to reap what he sowed, and I began to see it. And I learned a lesson. Wow, so the higher you go up in rank, where you have all this power, if you use it for evil and sow bad seeds, you literally reap what you sow. So nothing was going right for this guy. And I just remember finally when the light turned on for him and things began to shift, he started seeing the power of sowing good seeds. This guy named Leon Walker, best CMC I had in Great Lakes. Leon Walker was a CMC who constantly sowed great seeds, constantly helped others become better, and I learned a lot from him. I remember me, my wife, and Leon one time went out to breakfast, and Leon was still dropping nuggets of wisdom there. Help someone else be better. Make someone else's life easier. Now, don't do the work for them, just help.
Sure. Now, obviously, you're moving along very nicely in your Navy career. I've got to ask, though, with some of the obstacles you encountered earlier in your career, was there ever a point you thought, I'm not sure this is worth it, maybe I could do better on the outside, and you were seriously thinking about leaving the Navy? And then the second half of my question is, at what point did you say, regardless of what barriers are put in my path, I'm dedicated to this, and I'm going to make the U.S. Navy a career, and I'm going to go just as high and far as I possibly can?
So I made chief early. And
at what point?
So I took the exam, so I made it at 12 years.
Wow.
So the average person makes chief between 13.5 to 15 years. So 12 years, I was already a chief. And I was at TSC Hampton Roads, and I had a seal that was horrible. So I was being screened for orders for USS Enterprise. I had some high blood pressure issues the year before. So the screen, before you go to the ship, you do what's called C-duty screening. C-duty screening came back and said, hey, not recommended because of high blood pressure issues in 2005. So this is not 2006. So we went up to the chain command. So instead of the chain command saying, hey, let's help him, that CO went, hey, we need to get him out of the Navy. He's basically wasting our time. And even when I asked for help, none of the folks that were supposed to help me at TSC did help me. There was a guy named Michael Hunter. So Michael Hunter actually helped me. He was a Master Chief that worked for the schoolhouse. He was a guardsmate Master Chief, and he actually helped me out. But at one point outside of him at TSC, I thought about getting out in the Navy. So now I had progressed up to 15 years, hadn't made senior chief, and I actually set my card thinking, I can't believe this. People who have the power to help me don't want to help me. So it made me really lean my faith in Jesus, really made me talk to him. And once I began to do some self-inventory and really begin to align my heart and mind right with him, he began to open doors. I never forget, I had a dream about CVN 75 in the dream, but the 5 was covered in the dream. And I woke up and I went in and someone's name, the Holy Spirit, said USS Harry S. Truman. So I called the detailer who was not trying to get any of my phone calls, not trying to help me. I said, hey, I want to apply for USS Harry S. Truman. He said, don't try it. He named 5 of the ships that were not Harry S. Truman. And then he said, yeah, you probably won't screen for those either. So I told God, I said, Lord, this is in your hand. I've done all in my natural person I could do. So 24 hours later, I came in, logged on the email, and the email said USS Truman with like 5 question marks. And it was an email conversation between my senior listed advisor, the CO, and the detailer. And the detailer in the email had agreed, hey, how about I send them to Harry S. Truman? And I could sense the sarcasm in the email. Quote, he won't screen for these either, but if he does, yeah, I'll give it to him. So God led me to go to Little Creek to be screened, and I was done within 30 minutes of my screening. Fit for sea duty.
Yeah.
I submitted the paperwork, and I emailed it myself to detail like 7 times. And then orders to Harry S. Truman showed up.
Amazing, isn't it?
And that God's intervention
Yes.
helped make me, I want to stay around for this.
Our conversation with Gene Garland continues in just a moment, but right now, here's some troubling numbers. Did you know that up to 1/3 of military spouses are unemployed or underemployed? And did you know that almost 40% of those men and women have talked with their military member about getting out of the service so they can improve their job prospects? Those were 2 of the findings from recent studies by Burning Glass and Hiring Our Heroes. And those numbers have an impact on military readiness and national security. Let's face it, if a military family needs 2 paychecks and the spouse can't find a good job, the service member is going to be less effective because he or she is worried, first of all, about their economic well-being and, of course, the well-being of their spouse. Fortunately, the news isn't all bad. There are a variety of programs and services aimed at helping military spouses develop job skills and land a good job. And at Thomas Nelson, we're proud to be part of the solution. We're a member of the military's My Career Advancement Account program, or MyCAA. It's aimed at spouses of military members in pay grades E1 through E5, W1 and W2, and O1 and O2. The program provides up to $4,000 over 2 years and can be used for almost any type of education and training program. It helps spouses develop skills that lead to a better job, and better yet, MyCAA focuses on portable job skills, so you can easily land a new position when your military spouse moves on to a new assignment. Learn more about the MyCAA program at Thomas Nelson by calling us on the military team. Phone number is 757-825-2938 or email pounderg, Pounderg, at tncc.edu. Mastering new job skills as a military spouse? Well, it's closer than you think at Thomas Nelson, becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College. Now, as you worked your way, and I mean literally worked your way into the senior ranks, what were some of the lessons that you tried to impart to your junior sailors, folks who were trying to make that same journey? Because obviously, you overcame a number of obstacles to reach that position by that time in your Navy career. As you're mentoring junior sailors at this point, what are some of the lessons, life lessons you're trying to impart to them to help them, again, make that same journey?
Well, one of the things I learned when I got to Harry S. Truman as a chief, mentor someone who doesn't look like you. Mentor someone that's not from your background. Mentor someone that if you were to bring them to your neighborhood, they would kind of give you that side eye. Mentor someone different to you, number one. Try to sow good seeds. give someone a positive word that can uplift their day. One of the things we did on Harris Truman is we started a class on how to prep for NAVY exams. It worked. We did what's called a perform to serve, which was the reenlistment process at that time. We did a PTS brief. And what we did was we bring the CLXO in and talk about why you shouldn't get out the Navy, why you should hang around, and what you should do. And so the biggest thing I learned was, and I had an NC1 that worked for me, and I said, how can I help this young lady get to the next level? So when her orders showed up, she had a very Afrocentric name. And I never forget hearing two senior enlisted people go, kind of name is that? That makes no sense to me. How do you pronounce that? And I remember saying, hey, she's probably African American and it's pronounced this way. And I remember thinking, okay, this barrier is here too. Let me help work around this. And one of those two leaders was a guy who made chief at like 19 years. Mm-hmm. And I think he was still sour with certain things. So when that young lady got there, the first thing said, I pulled her aside and had the Amos Hardy conversation. Hey, people are already saying things because of your name, and you fit what your name looks like. But here are some things you need to do to stand out. So she worked hard. She worked deep. She came in late and stayed early. And she got Sailor of the Year on board the Harry S. Truman. And she ended up transferring off and picking up the rank of Chief Petty Officer. But there were others who didn't look like me, who I would also have and talk to and impart stuff in. There was a young lady named Stephanie Bloodworth, wonderful young lady. And I think our friendship and mentorship was so good, she ended up picking up senior chief. So one of the things I learned is sow good seeds, because you reap what you sow. Help someone else get promoted. Work behind the scenes to help someone else. And the other thing I used to do on Monday nights is I used to go help feed the homeless. And have a sympathetic heart to those who aren't doing so well. Because sometimes there are people beyond circumstances, beyond their control, that may lose everything. So me, my wife, my kids, we would go to the then Taiwan Bible Temple on Mondays, and we would feed the homeless. We would give away food. And it was great because it made us thankful to God for what you have. Another lesson I learned is be thankful for what you have, right? Mm-hmm. It's easy to complain. It's harder to be thankful. So learn to be thankful.
All good lessons, all good lessons. I want to talk, too, about your attempts to balance not only your Navy career, your family life, but also your education, because at some point you obviously understand that you need to work on your off-duty education to help you continue advancing your Navy career and get you ready for whatever comes next after you hang up the uniform. Talk about that experience.
So when I was at TSC Hampton Roads, and there was talk of helping me to be put out the Navy because of my health issues, I was led of God to go to school. So I started going to school, was able to finish my bachelor's degree while I was there. And in prayer, I went to God, what's next? And I had a dream, and the dream was a master's degree. So when I was on Harry S. Truman, I was blessed to make the pay grade at E8, which is senior chief, and I got sent to Great Lakes, which ended up being the best shore dory me and my family ever had. So when I went to Great Lakes, again, the climate of Great Lakes is way different. So in Hampton Roads, we complain when it gets to 34 degrees. In Great Lakes, 34 degrees is warm.
Yes, it is.
There was 1 week, the high was 9 degrees. I'll never forget that. But because me and my wife hated going out when it was cold, I started working on my master's degree. And thanks be to God, I was able to finish my MBA while there in Great Lakes and working a full military job at the same time. One of the things I would encourage people is try to have a work-life balance, right? You have people who stay at sea and they get promoted pretty fast, but if you don't invest in your wife, your kids, then later on you'll see that investment went lacking, and you'll get paid for it on the other end. Generally, that payment is not good. So because God directed my steps, I went from Harris Truman making E8 to Great Lakes, which was shore duty. And me, my wife, my son, we definitely, and daughter, we experienced the wonderful world of Great Lakes. We were blessed. God's hand was involved in all that. So my wife made Great Lakes history, and I made time for that. My son became the conference wrestling champion and made time for that. My daughter Natalie came up and she got her finished high school up there. She did well, and then become a mother while she was up there too. But that's okay. I love my granddaughter Tori, and she just ended up doing good. And then having that time out of the South in a different geographical area brought us closer as a family.
Sure.
So I would say to people, when it's time for shore duty, go to shore duty. Because you're going to go back out to sea if you decide to make the Navy a career. But you better make that time to go to shore duty, right? You better invest in your wife, your kids for birthdays, anniversaries, special recognitions. You need to be there for high school graduations if you can. You need to be there for middle school graduations. Kids don't forget. So you have the choice between going to shore and sea when it's time. Because let's say you're done with your sea duty, the details off you short, you need to take that shore time, right? Because if it's meant for you to advance and you've sown those seeds, you'll reap what you sow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, to kind of follow up on this, we often hear people talk about the need to achieve that work-life balance, and it is very important. I guess the real question becomes, how do you actually achieve that? You apparently did a very good job of that. What tips would you give to a military member serving right now in how you can actually achieve that desired work-life balance?
So I would say, because I'm Navy experienced, whenever you're on sea duty, go hard, qualify everything you can, qualify stuff outside your rating. Study hard to advance on your E4, E5, E6 exams. Make board, right? And when you do make chief, make that time to go to shore. Your family needs it. For other branches of service, if you can find that balance where you are able to be there, right? Because I know the Army has a different rotation, how they do business. You gotta make that time. Air Force does, gotta make that time. Coast Guard is kind of like the Navy, where you do sometime at sea, sometime at shore. Go to shore duty. It's worth that time to be there for your wife, your kids, your family. When I was on shore duty, my father passed away in 2006. And I was blessed to be able to be there for that, right? My mother, Carol Garland, dealt with some challenges, and now being a widow, and I thank God for Mother Carol. Hi, Mom, if you're listening. But it was necessary to be there, right? I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I would say try your best to do that shore duty. So once you go hard at sea, go to shore duty because it's slower. Try to throttle back. But try to have that balance where you're taking the husband or wife out to dinner in a place they like, where you're going with the kids to sporting events, because those Saturday baseball games and softball games, you can ask my kids, I don't know how many Saturdays that we spent out there at Chisholm Field with baseball games and softball games. Go there for them. We went to Great Lakes. It was necessary to watch my daughter Natalie walk across the stage, get her diploma. Necessary for me to be there to watch my son, Gene Garland Jr. in 2014, graduate and get his high school diploma. You got to make that time because the military comes to an end.
It does. It does indeed. And you still have your family, and those relationships are going to carry you through for the rest of your life. Now, in achieving the work-life balance that we're talking about here, what is your advice on factoring education into that equation? Because let's face it, military, you're busy with your military duties. You're busy with your family life. You're busy with whatever hobbies or avocations you may happen to have. What kind of guidance did you give to your sailors in terms of, working on that associate degree, that bachelor's degree? That's important too. And how did you guide them in terms of making that fit into what was already a very busy personal schedule?
So one of the reasons that I ended up working 3 jobs as a civilian is because I dropped out of college. And I learned how the civilian world works is it's not what's important what's in front of your name as it was behind your name. So when I retired, I was Command Master Chief, Information Warfare, Surface Warfare, Air Warfare, Gene Garland. So that title in front of my name was who I identified as. Once you leave, the civilian world wants to know, is it Gene Garland, Bachelor's of Science, BS? Is it Gene Garland, Master's of Business Administration? I would say to people, go to as many military schools as possible, because military schools are giving college credit by ACE. ACE is a group that comes in and evaluates military training. Then sit down with some sort of academic advisor to find out what your strengths are and what kind of program you want to get into. Find a college that is military friendly that will accept the maximum amount of credits. For example, I was an instructor in the Navy, so I get college credit through the Navy for basic instructor training, speech and public speaking. So every college I knew needed me to have a public speaking course. We already had that. So find a college. My college was Excelsior. And Excelsior took all the credits I went to. While stationed on USS Wasp, we 2002 did extended deployment. I started taking English 2, American History 2 while on deployment because we were deployed for I think 6.5 months. Didn't hit any ports towards the end of that deployment, so you had nothing but time. If the military offers you college courses on board, do whatever you need to do to get into it if you can. Then once you finish with your bachelor's, start looking ahead for some sort of master's program. Now remember, the family dynamic is so important. At Instant Great Lakes, there were days, not only days, where it was so slow. I actually took some of my college material into work, and when I was done with my work stuff, I would work on some of my college stuff. And I would knock out papers and then go do work and then knock out some papers. And then that way I was utilizing that time. I was surprised as I walked around in my building in Instant Great Lakes, how many folks were on, I forget the social media webpage before Facebook, MySpace.
MySpace, yes.
How many folks were just on MySpace doodling and doing wasting time? Make the most of that time when you have that time, right? Wisdom says if you have a 12-hour workday and you get 8 hours of actual work that you do, instead of going on social media, knock out some type of college course. Read something that expands your mind. Prepare for some type of test. So in the Navy, once you make E4, E5, E6, those are all tests. E7, E8, E9, once you make board fatigue for all selection boards. So unless you get in trouble, you're automatically eligible for senior chief, which is E8. You're automatically eligible for E9. So once you're out of the exam testing platform, right, continue to expand your mind by going to college courses because you're going to get looked at anyway for senior chief. Knock out some CLEP courses. So if you study religion all day long, CLEP has a world religions course. Well, I need another elective. I took it. Foreign language. If you speak Spanish, go take a CLEP Spanish course. So as I did all this stuff, it all ended up fitting in all the curriculum I need to get my bachelor's. And then once that, my master's.
I'm glad you brought up those points there because, first of all, the military does try to encourage education even when you're at sea. And we understand when you're underway, there may be some issues with internet access. The offerings with the NC PACE program, which actually has instructors on board the ship, you have a limited set of offerings there, but still it's an opportunity that you should try to avail yourself of. And this is true for all the branches. And you mentioned the CLEP testing a moment ago, something I talk about with military members that come to my office out there at Fort Eustis is, hey, if you think about this, let's talk about a bachelor's degree. You're going to have a public speaking class. You're going to have a history class, social science, classes like this. Think about this for a second. And we're talking about basic, lower division, undergraduate classes. If I give you a book on psychology and let you study it for the next 6 weeks or 2 months and then give you an exam on that material, there's a pretty good chance if you put in the work that you're going to score at least a 50 or 55 on an exam. And with CLEP, that's typically the passing score. In the military, we think about, 80 is usually the mark at tech school for advancement, what have you. But with CLEP, the bar is actually lower. Good friend of mine who was a Command Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force CLEP'd out of 24 hours toward his bachelor's degree with a very simple plan that I share with every military member who comes through my office. You pick that general class that you got to have to get your degree, but may not be that important in terms of the actual discipline you're studying, the general ed type classes. Pick that class, then, get yourself scheduled to take the CLEP exam and schedule it 6 weeks, 2 months down the road. Then go to the base library, go online, go to the public library, bookstore, get that CLEP study guide. And they got the CLEP study guide for virtually every academic course out there. And then spend an hour a day for the next month, month and a half, 2 months studying, and then go in and take the CLEP exam. And by the way, because you're a military member, you can take that CLEP exam for free. Civilian student has to pay $80 or $85. You take it for free, you pass it, you achieve the required score. Now you've got 3 hours of credit that you won't have to use your TA benefits or or Pell Grant benefits to pay for. You won't have to worry about taking the class online or sitting through the class in the classroom. You've got that square field, and you can press on. So CLEP, I think, is one of the really untold secrets in off-duty education for the military, and I truly believe that more and more service members ought to be taking advantage of that option, along with using that TA money. You know, Navy, I think it's $4,500 a year now. That money's on the table. If you don't use it, it's going to go to somebody else. And the longer you put it off, and then you start thinking about transition to the civilian sector when you retire, if you don't have the education square filled, it's going to make it that much tougher on you.
And that is correct. I would tell people, one, especially when you reach the E5, E6 level, education is good because it makes you competitive before enlisted selection boards. Officers have to have it. So the Navy is designed where officers are consistently getting great civilian level education. So when you leave after doing it 20 or 30 years, you have a master's paid for by that your branch of service. Listed people are different. You have to make that time. So in my mind, if you can waste time in the bar or waste time, doing frivolous stuff, you should be writing down your goals, setting up your goals, and that goal has to be education. An educated mind is a challenge to anyone because it expands the way you think. It makes you a critical thinker. It helps you to look at life through the lens of education.
And it makes you a better petty officer, a better chief, a better senior chief, or for that matter, it's going to make you more effective no matter what branch of the military you happen to be in.
True.
And that enhances military readiness. So it's a great investment, great opportunity. And again, I encourage our military folks on active duty, take advantage of those education benefits. Now with online education, you've got more options than ever. But be very judicious in making those selections you were talking about a moment ago. Find schools that are military friendly. Find schools that are regionally accredited. If you're going with a community college like Thomas Nelson, find one that you know has the articulation agreement so the credits, the degrees you earn at the 2-year school will fully transfer into a 4-year program. Now, as we kind of shift gears here, you've been in the Navy at this point for a while. Talk about how you began developing your plan to transition from the Navy and eventually return to civilian life. And when did you start making those kinds of preparations and plans?
So when my tour in Great Lakes was coming to an end,
And that was at what point in your Navy career?
I was at 21 years, I think, at this point.
And you still served another 9 years after that. But you're already, and again, yes. I emphasize, this is the smart way to do it. You know you've got a ways to go in the Navy, but you're already planning for that next step, and that's a very important point.
So I was blessed to get handpicked to help build pre-commissioned unit Gerald R. Ford in Newport News. My favorite CEO is a guy named Captain John F. Meyer, who's now Admiral John F. Meyer, who was my XO on Truman and my CEO on Ford. So I got picked to go to Ford. But the thing I need to have was a waiver in place because Ford was an E9 build. I was an E8 senior chief at the time. Well, the hand of God was once again involved. When I got to Ford, 8 months later, I picked up the rank of Master Chief and was now able to be a Master Chief Petty Officer on board Gerald Ford. Master Chiefs don't stand in duty. They're the top 1.25% of the Navy. And it was all the hand of God that got the promotion to manifest. Literally, I was a 1 of 1 ranked for 4 eval cycles, and you had to be ranked against them. Well, because the hand of God was involved, and he literally spoke and said that he would promote me, and he did. So I got to Gerald Ford, was now the senior counsel on board, had outstanding chief into Eddie Wilkinson, who's now a master chief himself. An outstanding NC1 and Denise Love, who's now a chief herself. And I kept the same mentality. And let me invest in them. Let me help them become better. With Denise, I used to do study sessions to help her study for making board. She made board, got selected for chief. With Eddie, we would set him up on the path to get promoted to senior chief, which eventually did happen. And then he, last year, picked up the rank of master chief. And I was shocked at all the people he called. So he said he called his mother first, and then he called me to say, hey, thank you.
And what a compliment.
And again, that's what I mean, invest in people who don't look like you. Help someone else. So look at the potential of the person. Everybody won't receive you, but for those that will, they're walking in wisdom. So help them become wiser. And then I put in for the Command Mastery program on forward, got picked up, and then my first tour at Strike Fighter Squadron 34. I'm getting to all this as a point to this. Strike Fighter Squadron 34, I had awesome COs, and I ended up being deployed in the task for 556 days.
To what location?
Oh, so we were deployed all over the Western Pacific. I got a chance to see Guam. I got a chance to see Korea. Got a chance to see Singapore. Got a chance to see Vietnam. Got a chance to see, all kinds of spots on the West Coast. But then we were gone for 556 days. It burned me out for being at sea duty. And remember, I'm a guy that talks work-life balance. So part of the reward they were offering me was 2 deploying aircraft carriers. Nothing against deploying aircraft carriers, but again, you have to have that work-life balance. So I chose to ask for shore duty at Norfolk Naval Shipyard because I still need to go home and be dad, husband, father, grandfather. And someone kind of said to me, well, you're a command master chief. If you go to a carrier and do well, you have an opportunity to be a force master chief. But I realized that my family, my beautiful wife, Kim Garland, who looks good and smells good, my kids had endured me being gone for 556 days, had grandkids now. I said, I need to go back and again be husband, father, son, all those things. So I chose to go Norfolk Naval Shipyard, got there. Norfolk Naval Shipyard was able to lead 1,000 sailors and 10,000 civilians. That was a heck of a job.
I could imagine, and quite a transition there.
And then what happened was somewhere near the end of the tour, unfortunately, we had a commanding officer get relieved. A good guy with a big heart got relieved. That created a lot of turmoil at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I think it's time for me to call it a day, and I submit my paperwork for retirement. Now, while I was at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, when I did have downtime, I worked on some certifications. So when the whole COVID thing started, I had to put together a team of temperature screeners, the screen folks coming in. I had to put together the training. I had to put together the right leadership. I had to hire those people. So I ended up getting a certification through Homeland Security. Got one of those. Then Navy Cool is an awesome program where the Navy pays for credentialing. And God led me to do the Resiliency Builder Leadership course. I literally had a dream, and in the dream, the Lord spoke and said, do this certification. It's going to be the hot certification in the future. So I did it. And so it's called RBL PTAC-T. It's Resiliency Builder Leadership Program Trainer. So it's literally a curriculum you do online, and it's a 4-hour oral board at the end. If you pass the 4-hour oral board, you get the certification. Well, by the grace of God and the support of my beautiful wife, Kim Garland, I passed the oral board, was able to, get the certification, and then they paid $2,965 for certification. I was able to take some of those things I learned to Norfolk Naval Shipyard. And then I began to see, wow, those folks getting paid big money for these certifications, not knocking E9 pay. I thank God for it. So then I submitted my papers a second time. First time I had disapproved, submitted them for a second time. And then I started going through what's called Transition Assistance Program, TAP. I went to rulings. And I started reaching out to already retired master chiefs, retired command master chiefs, because they had a level of wisdom I didn't have. They had the wisdom of already transitioning out of the military. And I would listen to some of the things they would say. There was a friend of mine who was Command Master Chief R.T. McLean, and he was the Command Master Chief for Carrier Air Wing 2, who had already retired. So like once a month, I'd be on the phone with him. He'd give me some advice about dealing with the VA. He'd give me some advice about dealing with transition. And he said a couple things that made me think. So if you're in the military any length of time, you become institutionalized. And there's 3 groups that are institutionalized: prisoners, professional athletes, and professional military personnel. Prisoners are so institutionalized that sometimes they get released, but they can't deal with the outside, so they do something to go back in. Professional athletes. Tom Brady's one of the best football players of all time. I'm an Aaron Rodgers fan. So Tom literally retired, and then 41 days later changed his mind. Institutionalized to the culture of the NFL. Military personnel. Once you do over 10 years, you become institutionalized. So part of your transition is becoming deinstitutionalized, learning not to be so rigid.
And how do you do that?
So the first thing you do is, one, spending time with the family. Number 2, go to a SkillBridge program. So SkillBridge is wonderful for helping transitioning military. Please, if you don't know what DoD SkillBridge is, look into it now. 3, SkillBridge gets you around civilians. So you learn 10 a.m. start time is not 10 a.m. start time. You learn in the civilian world, beards are okay. So as you, part of your deinstitutionalization is grow a beard. I know it goes, particularly for guys, it goes against everything you're taught being in uniform. Grow a beard. Number 3, set some family time around. Number 4, sleeping late a couple of days. Your body's already programmed because of being institutionalized, being up at 4 in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock. Sleeping late a couple of days. Yeah, it's okay to get up at 5 o'clock when you're looking to go work out, but don't do it just to do it. And then simply begin to relax and not be so rigid. And by doing these things, it helped me to transition out successfully.
Now, how did you happen to become a member of Senator Warner's staff? Talk about that. Talk about what your priorities are in that position.
So, as Command Master Chief at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, I was a big supporter of DoD SkillBridge. So, as paperwork would come across my desk, I would ask the background questions, and I would support every one of myself. Even my senior enlisted, I told them as long as you have a relief, the relief is capable and competent, I would approve it. The rumor was my predecessor was the master of the no, that he would recommend no on stuff like that. That's what the rumor was. Again, good guy, he did his career, God bless him. I'm not him. And so one day, there was a meeting set up where it's supposed to be myself, my executive officer, which is the awesome Todd Nichols, which was the best executive officer I've ever had in Norfolk Naval Shipyard, and Captain Diana Wolfson, which is the hardest working CEO I've ever worked for. That lady is at work 7 days a week. Christmas Eve, she'll be at work. That's how hard she works. The CEO couldn't make it. It was myself and XO. We brought in Mr. Lynn Ramirez from the city of Norfolk, who is also the city of Norfolk military liaison representative, and Mr. Herb Lindley, who I worked with at the Portsmouth Military Affairs Council. And they talked about DoD SkillBridge. And in the middle of the meeting, my XO goes, "Hey, he'd be perfect for that," pointing at me. And I'm thinking, I didn't even think about this. So again, I was retiring. I applied for the program, got approved, and went to go work for the Virginia Ship Repair Association. Worked with the awesome Bill Kroll. Bill Kroll was really, really awesome to work for. Worked for Bill, they're the VSRA, developing Veterans Outreach Strategy. So in the middle of developing Veterans Outreach Strategy, I was sent to the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, where I was blessed to meet the awesome, meet some awesome people over there. And when I met some awesome people, I was able to talk, do some networking. So one of the ladies over there, awesome lady, said, "Hey, I just got some, Senator Warner's office is looking for help. Wonder if you're interested." I said, "Sure." So I sent her my resume, and then she said, "Hey, there's a lot of people applying for this position, so we'll see what happens." Okay. So then I got the call, your resume made it through. So they did the first interview. Like the first interview was like 4 people. They said, "Hey, if you make it to the second one, we'll let you know." Second interview was like 8 people. I said, okay, so it was board-like. So you had multiple people asking multiple questions. I said, well, if you make it through the third interview, this will be the chief of staff from Washington. So then I got a phone call. You made it to the third interview. And so I think this one was 10 to 16 people.
Wow.
On a Zoom interview with the chief of staff from Washington, D.C. And so it was a board panel, right? And one by one, everyone was asking me questions. And then at the end, the chief of staff goes, well, if you make it to the finals, you'll have to go interview with Senator Warner himself. Okay, not a problem. A week later, I got a phone call. You made it to the finals. So then we had to negotiate date and time, and I had to go to Washington, D.C. I had to go see Senator Warner myself. And I tell you, God is just so awesome. So my appointment was at 10 a.m. with Senator Warner. I left my home in Chesapeake, Virginia at 6 a.m., right? So I'm thinking 3 hours is enough. I can't forget about D.C. traffic. So once I get into D.C., it's bumper to bumper. And 10:15, I finally found a place to park, but I'm already late. But I'm praying to Jesus, okay, help me make a way. Well, my phone rings, and it's the senator's scheduler. He said, hey, you won't believe this, but the senator's running way behind. can we move you to 11? I said, sure. And he was like, are you even in the building? I'm outside the building. I was outside the parking garage, just parking my car. Then so as I get to the building, I get met by a staffer who takes me up there and says, hey, Senator's running late, so we have to do you at 11:15. Not a problem, 11:15. So 11:15, they bring me back. Senator Mark Warner's there, and he just asked me a series of questions. God gave me favor with him, and then at the end, in my mind, I could sense God's presence in the room. So at the end, I believed God that I got the job. And so the senator was like, hey, we'll let you know. 24 hours later, I get the phone call. Hey, he wants you. So I just thank God for, again, this is all my opinion, my story. I think everyone in Congress goes up there with the right heart and intent. I know Senator Warner goes up there to look out for the best of Virginians. He has an awesome staff. When I got that call, I was thrilled. And then, of course, we negotiate salary, negotiate everything else. And then November 1st, they brought me on board.
Outstanding. Now, let me ask you, what are your basic duties as a military liaison? Again, as we said earlier, you provide a very important connection between the senator's office, the folks up on Capitol Hill, and the local military community. Talk in a little detail about exactly what that entails.
So part of my job as the military liaison / outreach coordinator is to stand the senator's place when it comes to military functions and events, expand the senator's brand when it comes to military functions and events, and then communicate to the senator himself the needs of the military. If you notice right now, there is actually a budget. And for years, there's this horrible word called continuous resolution that the senator fought hard and hard and hard against. Well, I've set up what's called a weekly. He reads it, and he uses that to help staff the right level of legislation to make sure our men and women in uniform have what they need.
Now, what do you see as being your top priorities in the job, given the challenges our armed forces and members of the military are facing in this day and age?
So I would say, number one, expanding the senator's brand. Number two, communicating to the senator the needs of the men and women in uniform. Three, supporting his priorities. Of course, he wants to see the best for Virginians. He would like Virginia to be a place where people want to stay when they exit the military. And he and others are working hard to make sure that happens.
And in terms of, you mentioned the communicating the needs of those who are serving right now. What do you see as being the top needs or priorities for folks who are currently wearing the uniform?
Well, child care.
Mm-hmm.
So you have men and women who are in uniform, and there are incredible long wait lists. So there's a young lady now, she's in uniform. The husband's the stay-at-home dad, and she's a command sergeant major, and they have one child. And right now, the wait list they have is 1.5 years for them to get into child care. So now the husband stays home and watches the child. And so he's been blessed to get a job where he can work from home, but that's one of the priorities for the senator is to work on military child care, right? Because you gotta have it and make sure the facilities are up to date. Another one is housing. I know you've seen on the news that now housing is privatized, and there's been a lot of consternation concerning housing. There's been a lot of issues concerning housing.
Including here in Hampton Roads.
Including here in Hampton Roads. He's working hard to make sure we hold the private companies accountable so that the homes our military members live on base are up to standard.
There's also been a lot of concern, too, about the Navy shipbuilding budget. Obviously, the Navy, to be effective, to meet its worldwide mission, has to have the right number of ships. Can you talk briefly about what Senator Warner's thoughts are in that area, what he sees as being the ideal size of the U.S. Navy in years to come and the types of vessels, ships that he believes we need to build more of to be able to give the Navy the tools it needs to carry out its mission?
So he's very aware of the condition of modern warfare. And the conditions of modern warfare means cyber is the warfare model of the future. He very much supports the president's national defense plan. He basically supports anything that can make Hampton Roads stronger, which is making sure that we have a effective, up-to-date military equipment, right? That's why he fights so hard to make sure that when it comes to the budget for Department of Defense, all the right language is there to make sure that we have enough money to not only pay for the building of ships, but for the modernization of ships, submarines, and aircraft, as well as the support that goes with them.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you, too, something else. I know that people in your position, among your many duties, in some cases, you may or may not be involved in the senator's selection process for folks who are applying for the military academies. Is that part of your portfolio on Senator Warner's staff?
It is. I actually lead the Academy Day, where young men and women throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia submit packages to apply for nominations to get into a service academy.
And what advice would you give to those young people and to their parents? Because, again, selection for the U.S. military academies, whether it's Annapolis, West Point, Air Force Academy, Coast Guard Academy, extremely competitive. The top get in, and when we have to turn away, a lot of folks are extremely well qualified, but it's just that competitive. What advice would you give them in terms of preparing that package, developing the kind of resume and academics they need to be competitive? How soon should they start? And again, what should they do to kind of help their package stand out when it goes into Senator Warner's office?
So one, they should be starting in middle school to be the most academically sound student they can. B minuses won't cut it. Always strive for the A pluses, number one. Number two, make sure you're physically fit, you're playing in some type of sport, and you're leading in that kind of sport. To be competitive enough to be the captain of the basketball team, captain of the football team, lead. The other thing is, if there's an NRTC, you get involved with it, right? That way you get the practice of leading people, because the higher you go, you lead people. As a command master chief, one time I led 1,000 sailors and 10,000 civilians. If you're taking the SAT score, the highest you can score. 1650s are extremely competitive. So when I see someone with a low SAT compete with 50 people that 1601, 1610, 1620, it's not on the same competitive level. If you're taking the SAT, take your practice tests, score and study well, right? I would tell people the night before you take a test, don't do any studying. Get a good night's rest. Get a good protein breakfast that day before, right? Eat peanut butter, fish. Yes, I said fish.
Sausage.
Something with protein in, right?
Yes.
Because the way the human body is designed is that you are what you eat, and protein helps you to recall easier. Never ever change your answers when you take these tests. Turn them in and just pray for the best.
But like you said, too, start the academic focus not in high school, but in middle school.
Correct. And then keep that press on through high school.
And like you said, be as well-rounded as you possibly can be, not just the top pencil, but also student leader, involved in a wide range of activities. Service in the community, I would guess, is also an important consideration.
Yes. Because, again, it's extremely competitive. You got the best of the best applying for these appointments. So you got to show where you're leading and how you're making your community different.
And typically, how many nomination packages does Senator Warner's office receive each year, and how many nominations can he actually make?
So literally, it's 500, and I think it's 10 per service academy. So I think he has now the ability to do 10 per service academy. So,
and that's primary and alternates.
So 10 primary, and then of course the list of alternates is where we're recommending this something happen to the primary. So I believe it's 10 per service academy.
And I would assume you probably offer advice as we do, and I'm not involved in the process, but I always say if you're looking to be a commissioned officer in the U.S. military, it's great if you can go to West Point, Annapolis, or Colorado Springs, but, not everybody's going to make that.
Right.
Meanwhile, there are other options out there to include the ROTC program at great colleges and universities around the country. Along with that application for the Service Academy, also do an application for ROTC, because in this day and age, everybody comes out of a commissioning source with the same type of commission, and you're competing on a more even playing field than in decades past, when all the academy grads came out with a regular commission, and the other folks, ROTC, OTS, were coming out by and large with reserve commissions.
Correct. Another thing you can do too, if you go to whitehouse.gov, the president and the vice president also do nominations. So again, whitehouse.gov, where it says Academy nominations, click on the link, and then there's information that can help someone.
Last question for you, Gene, and we certainly appreciate you taking time to be on the podcast here today. What do you see as being the biggest challenges facing the military community here in Hampton Roads and the service members in the years ahead?
Unfortunately, the rise of suicides. One suicide is way too much. I hate the fact that young men and women feel like there's no hope, no way out, and take their lives. That's a challenge right now. If you know, suicides have been all over the news. So if you see someone that's hurting, if you see certain signs that say someone's headed down the path, please get them the help they need. I think the biggest challenge to come is trying to stem back suicides on peacetime, right? So it's one thing if a sailor, soldier, airman, Marine, coastie lose their life in combat. It's a sad thing when someone becomes hopeless and takes themselves out. So I think the more resources that's out there to help folks, the better off people will be.
Agreed. Again, I gotta thank you so much for taking time to appear on the podcast. We've been talking with Gene Garland, retired Navy Command Master Chief. He's now in his civilian role. He's the military liaison for Senator Mark Warner, working out of his office in Norfolk. Again, Gene, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. On behalf of our producer extraordinary, Jim Worthy, I'm Gary Pounder. Thanks for listening.